Hey everybody, Henry here, and today with the new season only one day away, I figured now is a great time to do a detailed breakdown of all of the changes upcoming to Go Battle League in the new season, Might and Mastery. Now to start with, my name is Henry. I have been Legend every season since Season 3, and I believe each of the past 5 seasons I've made it into the top 50 ranked battlers in the entire world. So I feel like I have a pretty solid understanding of the game and what makes a good Pokemon and what does not. So today, I'm going to be going through in detail, change by change, talking about my thoughts, Pokemon that I think can benefit from it, and we'll also take a look at the PvPoke rankings. We have most of the information for the new season. There's a couple of energy values on certain changes we don't have quite yet, but I'll be going through Pokemon that I believe in, how I feel they can place into the meta as a whole, and as well as some Pokemon that I think might unfortunately end up being fool's gold. This is probably going to be the longest video I've ever posted on the channel. I know I said that last time for the September update, but I think this one is genuinely going to be longer, so I will try and break it down into sections. To start with, I'm going to be going through the changes to various attacks, and then once I've covered all of those, then I'm going to go change by change through the attack availability updates. So without further ado, let's not stall any further, and let's get right into the changes for the new season of Go Battle League. The first change I'm going to be talking about today is actually a nerf, and that is a nerf to the fast move Rollout. Now Rollout is used by quite a few different meta Pokemon, Dunsparce, Licky, Miltank, and Bibarel. And Rollout is getting its damage reduced. Currently, it's a 3-turn move, 13 energy generated per Rollout, and dealing 8 base damage. But in this upcoming season, its damage is reduced from 8 to 7. Now, today, I'm going to be simming through each of those Metamons to see, does that actually end up making a pretty significant difference? So I can go over to Matrix. I do like simming against rank 1s, just because I assume that if people are running Pokemon, they're going to have pretty high rank. So at first, we are going to do the standard Dunsparce, and then I have actually updated where we can add the new Rollout, which I have coded in as Rollout number 2. And let me make sure we have those IVs the same. So now we get to take a look at what it'll do against the meta. And right off the bat, we do see some changes. Here, these are the breakpoints. So basically, will Rollout do less damage in these matchups? It looks like in a lot of situations, the answer is yes. Rollout doing less damage in a lot of different matchups. Now, whether it actually causes wins to flip to losses, it looks like you are dropping Bibarel and Wigglytuff as the 2 losses that you drop here in the zeros as Dunsparce. As we move over to the 1s, Cresselia isn't a Pokemon that's seen too commonly, and let's take a look at the 2s. The 2s, oh my goodness, dropping Shadow Feraligatr is a devastating loss for Dunsparce, losing to a non-Shadow Steelix as well. So these are definitely some impactful losses, but the Shadow Feraligatr 2s, that is devastating, because as we see here, instead of 6 damage per Rollout, it's only doing 5 in the new season. So it looks like Dunsparce definitely going to be taking a hit. And we can preview next season to take a look at where Dunsparce ends up, down to 97 from 12. So Dunsparce not going to feel as neutral in this upcoming season. The next Pokemon I do want to take a look at is Licky. Now, Licky, of course, is going to be a Pokemon that is used less than Dunsparce overall, but I do still think that it is worth looking at, and again, we'll give it Rollout 2. Licky, more so an Ultra League Pokemon, but we'll still take a look. Again, a lot of breakpoints lost, so the Rollout damage nerf is being felt. There is, okay, I'm going to need to adjust it so they both have the exact same IVs, and here we go. Again, dropping Wigglytuff is a really annoying thing to lose as a Rollout user. We can now move to the 1s. Dropping Mandibuzz if your Rollout Body Slam Shadow Ball, oh my goodness. That is a brutal matchup to flip to a loss. Being a Rollout user that can't beat a Mandibuzz, yikes. That is not what you're hoping to see. And in the 2s, you are dropping against Bibarel and multiple movesets of Corviknight. Licky again, more of an Ultra League Mon, but I did think it was still worth looking at for the Great League. And then finally, we'll take a look at Bibarel with Rollout. And then we'll give it Rollout 2. And we will adjust both of these stats. So we are looking at as good of Bibarel as one can possibly have. You are now actually losing the zeros to Ariados. As a Rollout user, that does not feel great. In the ones, dropping Shadow Drapion. Shadow Drapion was already going to be a pretty difficult matchup for Bibarel because it's so frail. But it looks like that one flips to a loss. And you are now dropping Shadow Marowak because you can't roll out down after landing the Surf here. Because before, the rollouts would do enough damage that you could go for the Surf. And the Surf would actually knock out here. So if we pull this up, the Surf actually KOs because the rollouts are doing 4 damage, but the rollouts only do 3 damage next season, and with them only doing 3 damage, unfortunately, that is not enough to actually pick up that win against a rank 1 Shadow Marowak. So the rollout users will definitely feel worse in this upcoming season. So we take a look at Bibarel. Oh my goodness, the fall from grace. You hate to see it. And we have Licky at 107. Next, we can move to the Ultra League. Looking at Rollout, Licky, pretty highly ranked this season, so I will now be going to the Ultra League. Switch to that, and again, I like simming against high rank. We'll clear these out of here, and we'll get to take a look at Licky. So Licky again, and we'll be adjusting to Rollout 2. Go zeros. Let's see what we have. And oh, I forgot to adjust that to rank 1. There we go. Oh, you lose the zeros to Shadow Dragonite. Nidoqueen's not a Pokemon anyone should be worrying about, so that's not one that I'm too concerned about. In the, oh my goodness, in the ones, you are dropping Corv and you're dropping Golurk. And Golurk, of course, gets extra dynamic punch damage this upcoming season as well. And in the 2s, so not a lot of matchup losses per se, but you are feeling a bit more of a loss of consistency across these shielding scenarios where you are on average dropping about 20 points because you are losing a lot of break points where you just aren't doing as much rollout damage. So Licky, as we move into the new season, is now down to 67. So Licky, unfortunately, going to definitely feel the effects of this just in terms of it being a little less neutrally convincing, which it seems like is the goal of this nerf. The next change I'll be taking a look at is going to be an adjustment to the #1 ranked Pokemon in the Great League, Galarian Corsola. And that is the Nightshade, which is its bait move, although it is also its main way of dealing damage, is getting a nerf from 80 base damage down to 70. So an adjustment of 10 is a pretty significant one, and I'm very interested to see what this does to Galarian Corsola when it no longer is quite so convincing in these neutral matchups. So we are going to go for Galarian Corsola, throwing a second one on here. And I have set it up again to where we have Nightshade 2 that we can add. And this is going to be 70 damage instead of 80. Date here, and I think one matchup. Ooh, it looks like Shadow Feraligatr. You don't quite have the damage to beat it in the zeros anymore. Dropping the zeros to a Payback Corviknight and to Steelix. I'm not too worried about the Corviknight one. The Steelix one is good information to have. Oh my, losing the ones now to Azumarill is devastating. That is a really rough drop. Dropping Malamar ones, dropping Clodsire ones, Dachshund ones, Gastrodon ones. I believe those now switch to ties, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. So they go from close wins to ties now, which is not ideal. You are dropping a lot of firepower Like, in terms of average, you're only dropping about 15 points, but you are losing a lot of impactful matches. Now let's take a look at the 2s as well. In the 2s, not dropping much, because the main thing about Corsola in the 2s is the Astonish damage. And an adjustment to Nightshade, not as impactful in the 2s. So as we go back to the Great League, we take a look at Corsola. It's still ranked very highly. It's still ranked number 6, but it'll be less convincing in some of those neutral matchups. So I still think it'll be strong in this season, but having it drop down to number 6 is definitely something to keep an eye on, where in those neutrals, especially like Malamar 1s, that was a really nice get for Corsola that next season it looks like it's not going to have as easy of a time in that particular shielding scenario. The next change we're taking a look at is a buff, and that is a buff to Dynamic Punch. Dynamic Punch currently, let's take a look at the stats, is 90-50. So a bit more on the expensive side with 50 energy, but 1.8 damage per energy is incredible, and its energy cost is being reduced, and that means it should take it to 90 damage, 45 energy. Now, if that sounds familiar, that's because if I can type, it's now going to be a fighting type clone of the move Psystrike. That's a really cool adjustment. And let's take a look in our rankings and see what can learn Dynamic Punch. Of course, there are going to be certain Pokemon that are getting access to it, which I will cover a bit later on in the video, but for now we're going on current Pokemon that are using Dynamic Punch. Medicham, Poliwrath, Machamp, but realistically I think Machamp is probably sticking with Cross Chop just because of how fast it is, but it will be a little interesting to see if maybe we could see like a Rock Slide or potential Rock Slide Dynamic Punch set, but I think realistically this is more of a buff for Golurk and Medicham. So let's take a look at our good friend Medicham. We can go to the Matrix here. Medicham, ideally probably on Psycho Cut. I'm fine to run counter sims as well on Medicham, but I do think that odds are Psycho Cut is probably going to play better just because it does have insanely quick pacing. So now we get to add Dynamic Punch 2, which is quite nice. And then we can add this on here. Let's give this original Dynamic Punch, and then we'll give this one Dynamic Punch 2. So now we have 4 Medicham counter with OG Dynamic Punch. This one, I'm going to make sure this has Dynamic Punch 2. So we have counter, regular Dynamic Punch, counter, new Dynamic Punch, Psycho Cut, old, and Psycho Cut new. We can throw the Great League meta on here. Let's throw max stat product and let's take a look. So right off the bat, Psycho Cut is simming better than counter. The average is pretty similar, but in terms of wins, there are some nice wins that you can pick up with Psycho Cut. And it looks like Psycho Cut with the new Dynamic Punch is actually able to pick up Charge-a-Bug, which is a pretty interesting get. And outside of that, it's performing fairly similarly. Let's take a look at the One Shield. In the One Shield, it looks like this time you're actually beating Gastrodon, which is a pretty nice get for the Psycho Cut variant. So Psycho Cut with the quicker energy, with the quicker ability to get to Dynamic Punch now that it's 45 energy instead of 50, actually able to pull out a One Shield win versus Gastrodon. And we'll take a look at the 2s. So the 2s across the board, it looks like you are now actually able to beat Steelix, whereas previously the Psycho Cut Medi did actually lose to Steelix. So you're able to pick up Steelix. So it looks like there's some improvements here for Medicham, but not a tremendous improvement across the board. So Medicham currently ranked 157. Let's take a look up to 55. So definitely improved. That pacing is going to be nice. So I think that it could have actual play, but I'm not expecting it to return to like absolute meta Titan status just because it does still have some problems and because of some new changes that we will also be getting to here shortly. But definitely a lot better than it was last season, which is nice. The next move updates I'm going to talk about can honestly be classified in a group of 3, because it appears that these 3 moves are all being reworked to now having the same statistics, and that is Psyshock, Aqua Jet, and Sludge. All appear to be buffed to 70 damage and 40 energy. Currently, there's not actually a move in the game with these stats. The closest is Leaf Blade, which is 70-35, so if you can imagine, if a move is pretty close to Leaf Blade, it's going to be a pretty nice move. Now, let's take a look at what can currently learn these moves. So for Psyshock, Kanto and Alolan Ninetales, Hypno and Mew are basically the relevant ones. For the Master League, Tapu Lele can also learn this move. For Aqua Jet, Dugong, Golisopod, and then we get into like Wartortle and Quaquaval territory. And then finally, for Sludge, we have Grimer, Marshtomp, and Galarian Weezing. So right off the bat, honestly, I think there's some pretty exciting stuff here. And the first one that I do want to take a look at is going to be Grimer. I have Grimer all set up here and ready to go. And right off the bat, ooh, it looks like with Sludge, you do actually pick up Jumpluff Zeros, which is a bit of a nice get considering you are a Mud Slapper and you do pick up Feraligatr Zeros. You do end up dropping Chargebug though. Let's take a look at the ones. In the ones, you're again picking up Jumpluff. So it looks like having the cheaper poison damage is nice when going up against the grasses. And you're picking up a little bit of consistency, but still not really a top meta contender. And then in the 2s, it looks like it has you dropping Cresselia. So overall, a slight improvement for Kanto Grimer. We take a look at Grimer, currently ranked 202. And in the new season, it looks like it is still... Looks like for Grimer, it's currently ranked at 232, and if we move to the new season, it's up to 191. So a bit of an improvement. Nice having that quicker, like, ability to spam out poison damage, but still not making it like a top meta contender. I am intrigued to take a look at Marshtomp, because Marshtomp... Oh, that is Marshadow. That's not quite what we're looking for here, but Mudshot, Mudbomb, Surf honestly feels like a pretty solid moveset across the board. But obviously, we are just going to be running Sludge now instead. So, let's add Sludge and see what it does for Marshtomp. So, Marshtomp in the 0s. It looks like there are a couple matchups where it does a little bit miss out on having that water damage. Is there a water Pokemon that doesn't quite have water moves? Again, it finds you missing that water damage. And yeah, so overall, I'm a little intrigued now as we take a look at Marshtomp currently. Is Marshtomp... The next Pokemon we'll be taking a look at is Galarian Weezing, and I think Galarian Weezing is a really nice winner in this particular update. Weezing is now the ultimate Swiss Army knife. It realistically has so many viable combinations of charge moves. Brutal Swing, Sludge, Play Rough, Overheat, you name it, Galarian Weezing can probably do well with it. And it also has a Shadow on top of that as well. So today, I'm going to be simming it with Play Rough Sludge. I think you can definitely run Overheat Sludge, maybe Brutal Swing Sludge, but my guess is probably you can just replace Brutal Swing with Sludge, but if you really want to run 2 very spammy moves, you definitely have the ability to do so. Right off the bat in the 0s, a huge improvement for Galarian Weezing, picking up Pokemon like a Azumarill, Abomasnow, Jumpluff, Talonflame, just because you are finally able to have consistent same type attack bonus damage as your bait move. In the 1s, again, still retaining that Azumarill matchup, which is quite nice. Being able to pick up Dunsparce is a little wild. That's pretty cool. You are dropping Drifblim just because you're no longer able to spam out the Brutal Swings, but there are some pretty nice gets here for Galarian Weezing. And in the 2s, a lot of what we're seeing here is things that potentially Brutal Swing would influence being able to beat those or not, and that's the ghosts, like Galarian Corsola, Drifblim, Cresselia. So overall, I think the Sludge change is a really nice one for Galarian Weezing. Obviously, there's so many different movesets that you can run with it. I'll also check it out in the Ultra League, but I think it's kind of tough to sim this particular mon just because of the sheer volume of potential movesets that you can run. So here, I think I'm just going to duplicate this real quick. And then, like, we could have Overheat as one. We could duplicate and have Brutal Swing as one. And let's go to the Ultra League meta. And now that we have quite a few different Weezings, we can take a look. And it looks like kind of what I expected, where Brutal Swing Sludge isn't performing as well. But look at the average on Play Rough Sludge and Overheat Sludge. Like, granted, a lot of it is going to depend on successful baits, but these are some pretty nice pickups. Like, being able to pick up something like a Drapion, being able to pick up Feraligatr. Like, there's some nice gets for having Sludge, for sure. Now we can take a look at the ones. And in the ones, again, it looks like everything is outperforming the stock Galar Weezing here. And let's take a look at the twos. Granted, this is not even simming the shadow, but in the twos, it looks like more so, even in terms of the win rate, to slightly negative and a worse overall average, just because you don't quite have that same, like, Brutal Swing's 35, Sludge is 40, so you don't quite have that ability to double bait and get to the nuke quite as fast. But overall, I think it is a really nice change for Galarian Weezing, and should work out very nicely, basically in whatever moveset you decide to run with it. So overall, I do think Galarian Weezing is a pretty nice winner here, especially in the Ultra League, because as we know, it's already very solid in the Ultra League, and now being able to have really consistent same type attack bonus bait move, I think is a really nice move for Galarian Weezing. The next one I'll be taking a look at will be Psyshock, and that's on Alolan Ninetales. Alolan Ninetales is a Pokemon that I do quite enjoy. We are going to be simming it here, initially looking at Weather Ball, Dazzling Gleam, and then looking at having Psyshock. So Psyshock, not going to have the closing power of Dazzling Gleam, but it does offer it more coverage and a better ability to hit fighters. So we can take a look across the board. Some pickups, some losses. Having Psyshock over Gleam will make it more consistent, because obviously a lot of the times with Gleam, you have to try and bait to land the Gleam. In the twos, we actually pick up Dugong. That's a pretty nice get overall. So some interesting slight alterations in matchups for the Alolan Ninetales. Alolan Ninetales, let's take a look at the new season rankings. It looks like it is still ranking it with Dazzling Gleam, but that's because Dazzling Gleam is also getting a buff as well. So I feel like there's no better time to segue into the Dazzling Gleam buff than right now. And that is Dazzling Gleam. It sounds like a nerf, but in reality, it's actually a pretty nice adjustment. It's going from 110 damage to 90 damage and having its energy cost decreased. Now this means that for Pokemon like Ninetales, Alola, where initially one of the issues is it's so bait dependent. Being able to land a Gleam is great, but it's so expensive that if a Dazzling Gleam is shielded, you're probably losing the game. But sacrificing power but also having a lower energy cost should make Dazzling Gleam a lot more consistent, which is a pretty nice plus. And let's pull back up here. So PV Poke is estimating, because we don't have exact energy values, is estimating 90-55, which would put it in a pretty nice roll. 90-55, 1.63 DPE. I'm not going to go into this one too extensively just because we don't know the exact numbers on what the energy cost will be, but this is basically the best estimate, and this would be a nice adjustment in terms of increasing consistency for this move overall. The next change I'll be covering is Acrobatics, which is having its energy cost reduced. It's already a great move at 110 and 60. My guess is it'll probably be changed to 110 and 55, which is going to be a buff, but specifically on a Pokemon like Jumpluff, I don't think it changing to 110 and 55, which is I believe what PV Poke is estimating, is going to help all that much. And that is specifically because Jumpluff runs Fairy Wind. Now, Fairy Wind, 9 energy per Fairy Wind, 9 times 6 is 54. So you're running into the same problem with Energy Ball, where it's still 7 to the first and then 6 for the rest going forward. So 110 and 55 is a great move, but honestly, I don't see it helping Jumpluff a ton. Like, Jumpluff will always take having slightly cheaper moves and more residual, so that way it's a little bit faster to get to its second charge attack. But having a nuke move at 50, I feel would be a lot more impactful for it, whereas the change from 60 to 55, like, it helps, it definitely doesn't hurt it, but I don't see it making as big of a difference. I think Emolga could actually be a little bit interesting, because Emolga, of course, has access to Thundershock, but Emolga, interestingly enough, Thundershock's clone of Fairy Wind, it has the same issue. So even though I think just because Emolga is a worse Pokemon, that it probably helps Emolga a little bit more than it does Jumpluff, because Emolga is also a lot glassier, Emolga still runs into the same issue of 110 and 55. You're still running into that 9 times 6 is 54. So you get within 1 energy of that move, and you have to throw a whole other Thundershock or Fairy Wind to get to the first. So you have enough residual energy that it's 7 and then 6 going forward, but still being 7 to that first still does feel expensive. The next change is going to be Rock Tomb, and this Rock Tomb change has massive potential. Rock Tomb, currently, it's an awful move. 70 damage, 60 energy, 100% chance to debuff the opponent's attack. It's a terrible move. It's basically used when Pokemon don't have any other moves. Like, being able to debuff your opponent's attack is great, but damage per energy, 1.16 DPE for a 60 energy move is atrocious. However, Rock Tomb is getting a big improvement. It's getting more damage, it's going from 70 to 80, and the energy cost is decreased. Now, the interesting thing will be is how far are they willing to go in terms of decreasing the energy? The PV Poke estimate, if we go over to Rock Tomb, is 80-50, which would suddenly turn it into a really nice move. And let's take a look at what can actually learn Rock Tomb. Rock Tomb, Reuniclus, Spiritomb, Forretress, Claydol is actually a pretty big one here. Because if it gets to 80-50, Claydol suddenly gets very scary. And I'm actually going to pull up the new rankings here, and let's take a look at Claydol. Claydol suddenly, with 50 energy Rock Tomb, is a top 20 Great League Pokemon. We're talking a Mud Slapper. We already know how strong Mud Slap is, but every 5 Mud Slaps, it gets to a move that guaranteed lowers your attack by 1 stage, allowing it to kind of win by a war of attrition. So in the zeros, not as strong, but the more shields that are in play, the more it gets to just Rock Tomb you and Rock Tomb you. Look at that, we're at a 54% win rate. And then in the 2s, we're at a 52% win rate. Obviously, if you have a resistance to Mud Slap, you're going to do great into this Pokemon. Like, a lot of its losses are Jumpluff, Mandibuzz, Talonflame, Superior, basically stuff that resists Mud Slap. But if you don't have a Mud Slap resist neutrally, this Pokemon could get a little bit annoying. One thing that I'm curious about is if we take away Scorching Sands, just Mud Slap Rock Tomb by itself, the win rate is identical. That shows that most of the time you are just spamming out Rock Tombs with this Pokemon. So Claydol is a pretty big winner, especially if it is that 50 energy. Claydol is a pretty significant winner. And now let's take a look at some other Pokemon that do have access to Rock Tomb in the new ranks. Now, Cradily, we are going to get to that a bit later, but Spiritomb with a glow up at 56, Reuniclus at 76. I really want to sim Spiritomb because I have a lot of doubts here. And oh my goodness, that is an insane 1 shield win rate right there. My goodness. I am a little bit at a loss. What? How is this simming this well? There's just no way. Okay, this is... Dude, I'm a little bit shook right now. Why is this thing just demolishing the meta in every even shielding scenario? I was not expecting this even remotely. Okay, best to worst. It looks like it is just out neutraling everything. How is it beating Mandibuzz, man? How is it beating Mandibuzz? Oh my goodness. Okay, it is just the zeros. You end up losing to Mandy in the 1s and 2s, but it's pretty close. That is crazy. Oh my goodness. This is zeros here. Take a look at the 1s again. Why is this not ranked higher? I'm very surprised. I am very like, there has to be some kind of catch that I'm missing here. Like Rock Tomb and Shadow Ball, if we go back to here and then look at moves, Shadow Ball is 55. So I guess we're assuming perfect baits. Like if I take away the ability to bait in the 1s, what are we looking at now? Okay. If we take away an ability to bait, we're still above water in the 1s. Let's take a look at the 2s without an ability to bait. In the 2s, it still looks good without an ability to bait. Wow. Spiritomb really surprising me here. I was not expecting it to sim this well. I guess in a lot of situations, Sucker Punch is just a crazy move, and it does get same type attack bonus on Sucker Punch as well. Like, we've seen Pokemon like Low Kicks be interesting in an anti-meta role. My guess is it'll probably be a strong anti-meta Pokemon, but wow. Spiritomb, okay. Color me surprised. I was ready to have a lot of doubts about Spiritomb, and Spiritomb shut that down, but that's why we look into this stuff, because sometimes you can end up being very, very surprised. Also, I have way too many tabs open right now. Oh my goodness. Okay, so Spiritomb, let's go back through, not that tab. Where were we? Okay, we had Spiritomb versus Mandibuzz open. I don't even know what tab I was in. I have completely lost all semblance of thought after seeing those Spiritomb sims. Spiritomb actually looks like a really interesting anti-meta pick. Reuniclus, okay. Reuniclus, I am intrigued. What do you have for me? Reuniclus. Reuniclus, it's a Pokemon that I do quite like. It has some pretty solid bulk to it. Reuniclus, overall, even without taking out baits, it's simming worse than Spiritomb. So, Rune should be improved, but overall, I'm not really seeing a reason to run it over Spiritomb right now. Fortress, oh, this is what I'm very excited for. It has Rock Tomb Mirror Shot. I'm not a big fan of the idea of Rock Tomb Mirror Shot, because Mirror Shot, it is pretty bad, but I think Fortress is in a really awkward spot where Rock Tomb is now going to be a really good move. All of its other moves are kind of pretty bad. Like Mirror Shot does no damage. Sand Tomb exists but doesn't really do much. Like a Rock Tomb Earthquake is probably its best bet, but even then, it is going to be very slow to get to moves. Like this is not going to be a particularly fast Pokemon, and it's going to be... It is going to have its fair share of... Ooh, in the 2s here, I imagine this is just Rock Tombing. It is, yeah. So Fortress looking pretty solid if Rock Tomb does have that 50 energy. But Fortress, I expected to look pretty good. I'm still just shook by Spiritomb. Why did that look as good as it did? Oh my goodness. I believe that I do have a Spiritomb. I am filming this live, so I am actively going on my account right now and seeing if I have a Spiritomb. I do have a Spiritomb built. Wow. I'm suddenly very happy that I have a Spiritomb built. Okay, that is terrific to hear. These next two changes I'm kind of going to group together, and that is Foul Play and Discharge. Both of them are having their base damage reduced by 10, but having their energy cost reduced as well. So let's take a look at Discharge. Discharge currently is a pretty middling move. Even on Charjabug, as we take a look, it also has X-Scissor is 6540, which is a far better move. So for Charjabug, that's why in neutral situations, you're going for X-Scissor, because it has the exact same base damage, but it's cheaper. So you may as well go for the X-Scissor instead of the Discharge. So Discharge is dropping from 65 damage to 55 damage. To make this not be a nerf, I think the energy cost has to go to 35. 55, 35. Let's take a look here. So Fire Punch is 40 energy. I'm curious what is 30. Yeah, 55-35 is like Bone Club and Aqua Tail. So to me, that would make quite a lot of sense. 55-40 just sounds like Aerial Ace. It's not that good of a move. I think it would be more of a hindrance than anything. And if you already have, as Charjabug, for example, if you already have X's are at 65-40, why would you ever want a Discharge that's 55-40? So I'm hoping that Discharge does end up being 35 energy. If it ends up being 40, like obviously, let's take a look at the mons that can learn Discharge. Charjabug really needs to be 35, and Molga will take whatever pacing improvement that it can possibly get. So if it's 35 and Thundershock, then we get into straight 4 territory for a Molga, where it would be very, very spammy. Whereas something like Stunfisk, again, Thundershock, similar vibes, where it'll be 5-4 if it's 40, but it'll be 4-4 if it's 35. I think Stunfisk and Emolga are more fine if it's 40, whereas Charger really wants 35, because otherwise Discharge just ends up still being pretty mediocre. But overall, this should be a bit of a help for the Electrics across the board. And let's take a look. Stunfisk and Emolga are nice risers. Charjabug, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe this is simming it at 40. It is simming it at 40, yes. So it does end up actually how we expected it, where Stunfisk and Emolga, compared to where they are now, a nice improvement. They are big fans of getting extra pacing, but Charjabug does actually end up dropping just because it really doesn't help Charjabug in that situation. Charjabug would love increased efficiency, and it already has X-Scissor as a cheap move, whereas for Charjabug and Stunfisk, they're just getting a strict upgrade because they're getting better pacing. But again, we are very much in the dark as to whether it's going to be 40 energy or 35. 35, I think we will see a lot of Electrics. If it's 40, Stunfisk and Emolga are helped, but for Charjabug, it's really not doing much. Now, another move that I mentioned is Foul Play, which is getting a pretty similar treatment. Now, Foul Play, it's on a lot of good mons. Foul Play, Mandibuzz, Malamar, both top meta mons. And then we have some more of the anti-meta like Shadow Sableye, Oranguru. Realistically, Umbreon doesn't see much play anymore, but it was a meta Titan at one point. It's going from 70 damage to 60, and it's having its energy cost reduced. Now, this is one I think they have to be very, very careful with. This one, I do think it is not going to be 35. I'm very confident that it is going to be 40. 60-40 is still a fine move. Like if we go to Fire Punch, that's just Fire Punch. 1.5 DPE, I think that's fine. I really don't think they will do 35 here. I think doing 35 would be a pretty significant error considering the Pokemon that can already learn it. I'm curious to see what PV Poke is estimating here. PV Poke is estimating 40 as well, so they are expecting that it is just going to be a clone of Fire Punch. And now we can take a look at the Foul Play mons. Mandibuzz still simming with Dark Pulse. Malamar rising a little bit. Shadow Sableye, a huge riser. Shadow Sableye now having the same pacing as Feraligatr is quite nice. And if you do run a more attack-oriented Sableye, you can actually win the cap tie. So I'm a little bit curious to see in the Shadow Feraligatr matchup here, this is if you are running a more bulk-oriented Sableye. But if you're running more of an attack-oriented Sableye, do you win ones? You do win ones. That's actually a nice get for more of a high attack Sableye. Being able to do enough Shadow Claw damage that Foul Play knocks out. So I think Shadow Sableye could definitely be back. And a bit of spoilers, it is getting Dazzling Gleam there. And then we have Amoonguss, Oranguru, Umbreon. These are, again, more just anti-meta picks. They aren't going to have a tremendous meta impact. But Sableye as a big climber is something I'm very excited for. I like Sableye metas. And giving Sableye better pacing, I think it's always been decent. But in a meta where Shadow Drapion became as popular as it is, it was a lot tougher to use. But now, Shadow Sableye having better pacing to help it be more convincing neutrally, I think will be a definite plus. The next change we'll be taking a look at is Air Cutter. And Air Cutter currently is one of the worst moves in the game. 60 damage, 55 energy, truly atrocious. Now it's getting a big rework. It's having its damage reduced from 60 to 45, it's getting an energy cost reduction, and they'll have a chance to increase the user's attack by 1 stage. Air Cutter, in terms of the mons that learn it, we are not talking about inspiring picks. Pidgeot, Farfetch'd, Golbat, and from there, it's only getting worse. Like, I see a Pom-Pom or a Choreo on my screen, so not an inspiring list. Even if it's the best case scenario and it's 45-35 with a chance to increase the user's attack, I don't think Air Cutter is going to see much meta play, just due to the fact that the Pokemon that get it are not great. And I believe the final change we'll have to take a look at, and one that is actually pretty impactful, is Hex. Hex is getting some pretty nice updates. Hex, let's get this pulled up. Aha, over here in this tab. Hex is currently 3 turns, 12 energy, 6 damage. It's going from 6 to 7 damage, and it's having its energy increased. So, Hex is becoming a better move. Now let's take a look at what Rollout is currently. So Rollout is currently 8-13, and it's going to 7-13. So new Rollout, keep in mind, 3 turn, 7-13. Let's take a look at Hex. If you add 1 and add 1, 3 turn, 7 and 13. So they are updating Hex, so that way Hex is now going to be a clone of the newly nerfed Rollout. Now Hex is actually learned by some pretty nice mons. We're talking Alolan Marowak, which I think will still have struggles just due to the fact that its typing is not great into the current meta. Drifblim, Dusknoir. I think Frostlass is actually a really big one. I'm very excited for Frostlass. Jellicent. I think Jellicent could potentially see a bit of a return to form. Because let's take a look at Jellicent. Jellicent's always had good stats. And Jellicent here, obviously, typically running Hex, which is 4 energy per turn. So you're in a bit of an uncomfortable spot where you end up having, for Surf, 4-4-4-3. Whereas if you adjust that to 4.3 energy per turn, so it's basically 13, then you end up being 4 to the first, but you're actually cheaper on those next residuals, because after 4, you're at 52 minus 45, you have 7 residual, and 7 residual plus 13 times 3 is actually enough to get you 46. So Surf should go to 4-3-4-3 if I'm not mistaken. Granted, it's a bit late at night here when I'm recording this, so my math could be off, but having a cheaper Surf faster due to the increase in energy generation is a definite plus for something like Jellicent, where Jellicent really didn't like the Surf rework because it hurt its pacing. But with better energy generation on Hex, that's something that can help kind of more neutralize that out. So overall, this is a pretty nice change, and I am very excited to see. Take a look at the Hex mons. Dusclops, a huge winner. Dusclops up to number 8. Dusknoir at number 9, but it's running Astonish. Jellicent at number 17. Drifblim now simmed back on Hex. Alolan Marowak. I will, for Zionic's sake, sim Alolan Marowak. Let's take a look at Hex. What's it looking at? Not great into the meta in the 1s. In the 2s, still underwater. I can also look at Fire Blast, because I know people with Hex ran Fire Blast quite a bit, but I think for the same reasons why Skeleturge sees no open league play at the moment, even with a buff to Hex, I'm not seeing Alolan Marowak having a lot of play. Being a Fire Ghost is actually a pretty significant liability in this current meta, and even with a buff to Hex, it's not enough to save Alolan Marowak. That's why Alolan Marowak is still not anywhere close to the top, and there's a lot of ghosts that are ahead of it. Frostlass is one that I am pretty intrigued by. So Hex Frostlass. Ooh, the 1s are looking pretty nice here. 58%. Okay, Frostlass. Let's take a look at the 0s. 63% meta win rate. Okay, sign me up. I am sold. And in the 2s, it is doing worse, but overall, this is simming way better than Marowak, and Marowak was listed higher up than Frostlass. So I would personally believe in Frostlass a lot more than I believe in Marowak. Outside of that, I mean, there's a lot of other Hexmons like Cast Form and stuff like that, but realistically, I think these are going to be the main ones. For Ultra League, though, let's take a look. XL Jellicent is back. Very highly ranked. Looks like very even in the ones. In the zeros, 60% win rate. That is a pretty solid win rate there for the Jellicent. And in the twos, 46%. So Jellicent XL, which I know a lot of people have built from days past, should have quite a bit of play in this upcoming season. I don't think it's going to be, like, it's ranked 9. I think that's probably slightly overranked, but I think that it will have a lot more play than it's had in previous seasons, whereas in like this current season, for example, it basically has no play to speak of. So I believe that is actually all of the attack availability updates. Sorry, all of the attack changes that we've covered. We have not gotten into the attack availability updates. There is so many to cover, but I believe that is all of the attack changes that we have covered. And now we can get to the fun stuff. The first attack availability update we'll be taking a look at is Piloswine. Piloswine now gets access to Icicle Spear. Now this is a pretty nice addition for Piloswine. Currently Piloswine's on Avalanche. Avalanche, obviously an amazing move, 90 damage, 45 energy, but Icicle Spear, what it sacrifices in terms of damage, you get cheaper moves. And in a meta where pacing is often everything, having access to a cheaper move on Piloswine, and Mamoswine does get it as well, should hopefully offer some added flexibility for Piloswine, just so that way it doesn't get so severely outpaced. I do have a regular Piloswine with the old moves, the new moves, and then a shadow for both as well. And it does look like right off the bat here, pretty similar performance across the board. Some wins, some losses. And that's in the zeros, where Avalanche should probably do a bit better. And now we get to take a look at the ones, and in these shielded scenarios, Piloswine used to get really outpaced. So now having access to a cheaper ice move is a plus. Like, you actually beat Mandibuzz, whereas before you were a Powder Snow Avalanche user that lost to Mandibuzz in the ones. You're picking up Marowak, picking up Serperior. There's a couple things that you do end up dropping, but overall, the Icicle Spear variants do end up coming out on top. And now let's take a look at the twos. And in the twos, a very similar story. Wow. The shadow in the twos, my goodness, that is putting in work. There's a lot of mons that it should beat in the twos. Like, how are you losing to Jumpluff? I guess with a double bait when you had Avalanche into an Energy Ball, but you're actually picking up a lot of these matchups that you weren't able to win before because you were just getting so severely outpaced. I don't think Piloswine is going to be a big meta player, but at the very least, Piloswine should have increased play in this new season. It gets up to 157, so not going to be a top meta pick, but at the very least, it does get improved. Next up will be the Master League, and that's going to be Mamoswine. Now, Mamoswine currently, more often than not, if it's run, is run using Mud Slap, and I'll be a little bit intrigued to see what Icicle Spear can do for it. Obviously, in the Master League, things are pretty bulky, so more often than not, more damage is nice, but I think having faster pacing is usually never a bad thing. It looks like in the zeros, you are picking up a couple new matchups just due to the fact that you have the faster pacing. You're actually beating Zygarde, which we are big fans of ice types actually beating Zygarde. You are dropping Landorus because Landorus is actually able to survive the Icicle Spear, but there are a couple pickups there in the zeros. Let's take a look at the ones. The ones is looking quite a bit worse. Mamoswine's not a particularly meta-relevant Pokemon in the Master League, but it looks like overall probably a slight downgrade as far as Masters goes. I can also sim Powder Snow as well, just so we can see what it looks like. So we'll sim Powder Snow as well in zeros, ones, and twos. Looks like a slight negative in the zeros. In the ones, about even. And in the twos, an improvement. So Mamoswine is actually able to beat Shadow Rhyperior. It's able to pick up Xerneas and Zacian. With a lot of baits, it is able to pick up Duskmane, but obviously you would have to successfully Icicle Spear bait quite a few times, and it actually doesn't get charmed down by Togekiss anymore. So I would say overall, depending on the moveset that you run, Icicle Spear is a nice thing to have on Mamoswine, but realistically, Mamoswine is not a Pokemon that sees a ton of open Master League play. It's more so a Pokemon that's better suited for Premier. The next Pokemon to take a look at will be Togetic. Togetic getting access to the newly reworked Psyshock. Now, Togetic has run a lot of movesets over its time in fringe anti-meta play, and it also benefits from the reworked Dazzling Gleam. So more often than not, it would run Aerial Ace Ancient Power. We've also seen Aerial Ace Dazzling Gleam. Now it would probably run Psyshock and Dazzling Gleam. Psyshock will give it coverage into the poisons, and it would also allow it to hit for neutral against fires, so I'm curious to see how this performs. So Togetic in the zeros, not doing amazingly across the board. We can take a look at the ones. The ones, there's a couple pickups, but a couple matchups that you do end up dropping by not having Aerial Ace. And in the twos, overall about the same. So to me, I don't think Togetic's going to see a ton of play. It is a nice coverage move for it to have if you do end up using it, but I don't think it's going to see a tremendous amount of meta play. Togekiss gets access to Psyshock. To me, this is a pretty irrelevant change. I don't think it's going to impact things tremendously for Togekiss. Like Togekiss, I guess if it ends up on a poison type in the Master League, but outside of Master League, it's not really seeing much play. Like, I guess occasionally in the Ultra League, but there are just better Charmers and better Fairy types in the Ultra League. It's just pretty severely outclassed. Ancient Power is 45, and Aerial Ace is 40. So even with Psyshock at 40, it does give it a better move than Aerial Ace if it does want a cheap move, but it's not having an increase in pacing by any means, so I don't think it's going to do much for Togekiss. Next we have, I am going to get cooked for my pronunciation of this, Reuniclus. If I got that wrong, I apologize. I'm doing my best. Can now learn Psyshock. It is an interesting mon. My recollection is its stats were, its stats actually aren't that great either. Like, Psyshock is a nice addition to its moveset. It sets it up to where if it gets an actual fast move instead of Hidden Power or Zen Headbutt, maybe it can do something. But until it gets a fast move, this is going to do nothing for it. Bruxish getting access to Psyshock. So Bruxish, I do want to take a look at Bruxish, because Bruxish, Aqua Tail, Psychic Fangs, I think it's in a bit of an awkward spot where Bruxish really likes being able to debuff things with Psychic Fangs. So in the zeros, Psyshock should look better, but it's still really underwater, and the more shields that are in play, the more that Psychic Fangs is going to do better, because it is assuming that you're just clicking Psychic Fangs and they can't ever really shield the confusions. Next up, we have Venomoth getting access to Psywave. Venomoth is a Pokemon, if you take a look at its charge attacks here, it is a Poison Fang user that has access to Psywave. To me, that's pretty cool. Like, currently it was on Confusion, and Psywave is just strictly better. So now we can take a look, and it looks like Psywave, you're picking up Dugong, Malamar, Shadow Marowak, and Toxapex. You're still pretty underwater, but it is definitely a lot better. Let's take a look at the ones. In the ones, again, you're doing better. You are, oh my goodness, with a bait, you're picking up Drapion in the ones. For Alligator, Gastrodon, Azumarill, and let's take a look at the twos. I imagine the twos will look pretty good, yeah. The twos, you're picking up a lot of wins here, but that's basically because you're just poison fanging your way through things. But against something that has a Psywave resist, like let's say a Steelix for example, you're just completely helpless. So Venomoth will definitely be improved. I don't think it's improved enough to see like a lot of open Great League play, but it could actually be used as a spice pick, whereas in previous seasons it was pretty miserable trying to run Venomoth. And now let's get to one of the big meta shakers, and that is Lapras. Lapras getting access to Psywave and Sparkling Aria. Sparkling Aria, if you have forgotten, is a move that was introduced to the game when the Primarina Com Day happened. It's 80-45 as you take a look at Hydro Cannon, so it's just Hydro Cannon but 5 more energy. And Lapras currently has Surf, which is 75-45. So for Sparkling Aria, think Surf, energy cost, but 5 extra damage. So Lapras will never say no to that, and Lapras as well now getting access to Psywave and Sparkling Aria, this thing is going to be scary to deal with. I am going to put up OG Lapras, and then we can duplicate it and then give it the new moveset. But this thing I am expecting to be a meta shaker, absolutely. It is going to be very interesting in terms of how it plays, because it is not going to play like your traditional ice type like we're used to with Dewgong. Like, look at these wins. Huge pickups across the board. You're basically only dropping Sableye, because obviously that resists Psywave, but in so many of these neutral matchups, Dewgong, Feraligatr, Gastrodon, Azumarill, Ariados, you're picking up Shadow and Annihilape zeros. This thing looks like a beast, and I am so excited for it. In the ones, 26 and 18, all these wins. Lapras is so back. My goodness, am I excited for Lapras. And in the twos, 22, 22, you are somehow picking up Shadow Drapion 2s just by virtue of, here, obviously, it is assuming that it gets the crunch debuff on the third one. An earlier crunch debuff may actually impact this and flip this, but it looks like you just win the 2s and the 1s. You can land an Ice Beam to win the 1s. This is a Psywave user beating a Dark Poison. Lapras is going to be sick. I'm so excited for Lapras. Lapras should be very, very strong, and I think that Lapras, in the Great League especially, will be strong enough that it is going to be worth bringing at least one Psywave resist on a lot of teams that you build. But one thing before we get off Lapras that I do want to make a note of, and that is that Lapras, due to the fact that his fast move is Psywave, has some weird losses and some weird wins that other ice waters like Dewgong do not have. Like, Dewgong into something like a Mandibuzz is going to do great. But Lapras into Mandibuzz, as we take a look here, you can win it, but it's with baits. Let's take off baiting. Lapras into Mandibuzz. Okay, it does look like you can still beat Mandibuzz. If it's like, you can still beat Mandibuzz, but I believe I may be misremembering it, and it's Galarian Moltres. But Galarian Moltres without baits, look at this. Moltres is winning the 1s and the 2s against your ice water type. So it is, the ice damage is a lot less consistent. It is a pretty consistent dealer of psychic and water damage, but in terms of dealing ice damage, it's not going to be nearly as consistent. So I don't think Lapras can easily slot into a lot of the traditional Dewgong style teams, because the things that it beats and the things that it struggles against are very different. Like, Dewgong obviously did very nice against Drapion. It could hold its own. Lapras can still hold its own in the 1s and the 2s, which is very cool. But against Moltres, Dewgong always did great there. And Lapras can honestly struggle quite a bit if shields are up. So when it comes to team building, I think keeping that in mind will be very helpful. And as well, against something like an Annihilape, Lapras actually has win cons, whereas for Dewgong unfortunately struggled quite a bit, just due to the fact that it got so severely outpaced and it didn't have the Psywave super effective pressure that Lapras had. So Lapras, I'm putting a gold star next to Lapras. I'm very, very excited for it. I think it's going to be a top contender. And we are on the new season, so let's take a look at the ranks. Number 3, let's go Lapras. Now Lapras, obviously, there are a lot of things that do have Psywave resists. So when you're running Lapras, pairing it with something that is going to do well, like, my initial thought is Lapras plus Air Slash Mandibuzz should form a very strong core, because a lot of the Pokemon that beat Lapras just beat it because they resist Psywave. And if they resist Psywave, then they're probably going to struggle into Mandibuzz. So I'm a big fan of Lapras. One thing that I do want to double check here, with Lapras in particular, what does it do versus Wigglytuff? And as we take a look here, it's winning in all evens versus Wigglytuff, which is very, very cool. So I am a big fan of Lapras. I'm very excited to see what it can do this season. I was a big fan of Dewgong last season, so having a Mon that has similar coverage but competes in a new way, I think is awesome. I'm a huge, huge Lapras fan coming into this season. But guess what? That's not the only Pokemon that is getting access to Psywave. Grumpig is also getting a double buff. you remember back at the start of the video when Dynamic Punch became Fighting type Psystrike? Grumpig gets Dynamic Punch and it gets access to Psywave. So let's take a look at Grumpig. I am not even going to bother to sim it against old Grumpig because to me that is just incredibly not worth it. Like as we see here, Extra Sensory, Shadow Ball Psychic, atrocious. It is not even worth our time to see all the new stuff that it picks up. Let's just see how it sims into the meta. And in the ones, we're talking a 54.3% win rate. Obviously, it's a Psychic type that has a Psychic type fast move. So if you run into like a Dark, Dynamic Punch will be quite nice. A Ghost, you have Shadow Ball, but if you're getting outpaced, then things could get a little bit uncomfortable. Let's take a look at the ones for Grumpig. 56% win rate, pretty solid across the board. And in the twos, a 45% win rate. One thing that I think Grumpig has going for it is Ghost fighting. We've seen from Annihilate. It's a very difficult combination to resist. Basically, if you have that offensive coverage, your charge attacks are going everywhere. And purely based off that, I think that Grumpig will have value this season. Obviously, Grumpig is going to have its bad matchups. Like if it gets stuck against Malamar or Shadow Sableye, it's going to have a terrible day. But I think that Grumpig, purely based off the fact that we know Ghost fighting coverage offensively is amazing. Purely based off that, I think Grumpig will have value. I am a little skeptical of Grumpig being ranked 7 for the Great League and for the Ultra League ranked 1. I have my doubts, but I think Grumpig will have value purely based on the fact that its energy goes everywhere. So, Grumpig, another contender. I personally am more of a fan of Lapras, but I know that in the head-to-head matchup, obviously Grumpig will destroy Lapras, but I really like how Lapras looks into the meta overall. All right, next update here, we have Furret, and Furret is actually getting double buffed as well, getting Trailblaze and Swift. So they have buffed Furret again and again and again and again. So Furret, Sucker Punch, Brick Break, and Dig was its current moveset. And now let's go over to here and let's go to Furret. Now it's Sucker Punch, Swift, Trailblaze. 1900 stat product, not something to sneeze at by any means. That's a pretty solid stat product. In the zeros, 41%, not looking like a top meta pick. In the ones, 54, so looking better for Furret, which is quite nice. And let's take a look at the twos. In the twos, 54 again. So looking like more of an anti-meta pick, but it should have more play than it's had in previous seasons, which is nice because they are really liking to double buff a lot of these Pokemon. Next up, we have Linoone. And you might be saying, surely there's no way they gave the exact same move to Linoone that they gave to Furret. Well, trainer, they did just that. Linoone also gets access to Swift and Trailblaze. So Linoone's biggest issue was all of its moves are expensive. Dig, Grass Knot, Thunder, it has nothing cheap. And now it gets 2 moves that are cheaper than anything it currently has, which is quite nice. So let's take a look at Linoone. Suddenly on Swift and Trailblaze, that's a pretty nice glow up for Linoone. Still underwater in the zeros, 39% win rate, not what you're hoping to see. But in the ones, we're looking even, 50%. And let's take a look at the twos. The twos, 54%. So pretty similar overall to Furret. I think whether you decide to use Furret or Linoone, basically dealer's choice. They're going to have very similar matchups. Obviously just Ghost fast move versus Dark. But I think both of them more fall into an anti-meta role. But they're both going to be a lot better than they were. Next up we have Drampa. Drampa learning access to the move Swift. Drampa, one of its issues is, again, its moves are expensive. Like Fly is its bait move, but it would love something cheaper, and in this upcoming season, it will have something cheaper when it can now run Swift and Fly. At the end of the day, Drampa is still Drampa. It is a very attack-weighted dragon type, and while its typing can be a bit intriguing because nothing else really has that typing, it's still going to struggle neutrally in a lot of matchups. Like we're talking 37% in the ones, in the twos. We do get up to 50% because Dragon Breath in the twos can really add up. So it's an improvement to Drampa, but I still don't see Drampa seeing basically much of any play. All right, next up we have Dusknoir getting access to Fighting type Psystrike, Dynamic Punch. I am very excited about Dusknoir. Dusknoir is a Pokemon that never had coverage. Dusknoir, even in Ultra, was ranked very highly last season, and I tried it, and even though it felt strong neutrally, I really didn't care for it because it didn't have access to any kind of coverage. If you got stuck against a Licky, you got stuck against a Drapion, you were just dead. Well, now it gets access to Dynamic Punch, so it finally has the coverage move that it has been crying out for quite some time. And with that coverage move, it does make it sim quite nicely. 54% in the zeros, in the ones 56, and in the twos 52. The thing that I want to check though is baiting. This is what I want to see. If we take baits off, 50-50 in the twos, not bad. Genuinely not bad. In the ones with no baits, 56. So it seems less bait dependent than I was expecting, which is kind of nice to see. I do want to see it in Ultra as well. So I will have to adjust it so it's in Ultra. And then Open League. Okay. And let's sim it in Ultra and just see what happens. I'll put baiting on selective. All right, 51% there. In the ones, 51. And this is with baiting on, and 46. So overall, it should be improved. Having a coverage move is nice. I think the coverage move is, 45 energy is pretty nice. And with Astonish being 10, it's going to be 5-4 pacing to Dynamic Punch. So I think it'll help Dusknoir see more play. I still do think that Dusknoir is like fringe meta to like strong anti-meta. So I don't think it'll be like a top meta contender in the Ultra League, but I think it'll be very playable. And we're probably going to see multiple people make leaderboards using it because it'll be a very playable Mon. I think there are still Mons that are stronger than it, but giving it a covered move that it's desperately wanted for forever is really nice. All right, next up we have Sableye. Sableye getting access to Dazzling Gleam. Now, Sableye, in previous seasons, obviously, ran Foul Play Return or Foul Play Power Gem if you were the Shadow. So now, as we move back to the Great League here, let's go to Shadow Sableye. And now, it'll have a bona fide move for hitting for super effective damage against Dark types. And opposing Dark types were usually pretty problematic for it. So we can take a look in the zeros, not simming the greatest. It is a Shadow Sableye after all. In the ones though, we're looking at 54%, which is quite nice. And let's take a look in the twos, 58%. Now with that straight 5 pacing on Foul Play, Sableye really able to overwhelm some of these slower, bulkier picks just by virtue of outpacing them. And we discussed earlier, if you have the slight attack weight on that Sableye to be able to cap time most Gators, then you can actually pick up Gator 1s as well, just by virtue of winning CMP and the Foul Play number 2 just knocking them out. So Sableye, it's a big riser in the ranks, and last time I was a huge believer in it, and I ended up being wrong. It ended up being more of a fringe pick just because Drapion Azumarill core became very popular, and in a Drapion Azumarill environment, it was tougher for Shadow Sableye. But now with better pacing, I'm so back. I'm ready to be hurt again. Let's go, Sableye. Next up, we have Ribombee getting Charm. I love Ribombee. Ribombee is great. Ribombee, a Pokemon that I greatly enjoy. Ribombee, its issue was never its fast move. Its issue is the fact that it has no bait move. So Charm doesn't really help it much. I'm not sold on Ribombee. There could be a meta where being a fairy bug is very nice, and maybe we see it have play as a Charmer, but it's outrageously frail and it has awful pacing. And I think if you fix the awful pacing issue, then we're talking, but Charm doesn't fix that. Charm just gives you fast move pressure and makes your pacing problem even worse. So Charm Ribombee, I'm not even going to sim. I'm just not expecting much from it. Next up, we have Rollout on Blastoise. Rollout on Blastoise is cool. This is similar vibes to when they gave Rollout to Bibarel, and suddenly Bibarel had way more neutral play. Look at the zeros here. 58% win rate. Yes, sir. Okay, now we are talking. In the ones, 50-50. We are Hydro Cannon Skull Bash. We can also run Ice Beam if we want to. And in the 2s, 47.8%. I'm curious to sim Ice Beam. Ice Beam, yeah, 47 there. Are we still 50-50? Ooh, we're simming a lot worse in the 1s if we have Ice Beam. I guess Skull Bash just offers a lot of neutral play. So it looks like Rollout, Hydro, and Skull Bash. I'm excited for Blastoise. We can take a look at where it's ranked now. It's up to 47. I do think Blastoise will probably be in more of that like top anti-meta role / bottom of meta where if I was a betting man, I would say it's probably more of like top anti-meta where I think people will have nice results with it if they try it. Just because it has a lot going for it. We know Hydro Cannon's great. It is good bulk, and Rollout, even with the nerf, just still offers Blastoise that bit of coverage, whereas previously, anytime you went up against the water resist with Blastoise, you were pretty sad. But now you have a little bit of extra neutral play. So I really like this change. I do want to take a look at it in Ultra as well. So we can go to Ultra, and let's take a look at a good friend Blastoise. I believe that oh, that's a nice win rate in the 0s right there. That is very clutch. I believe in Ultra, I do have the rank 1 Blastoise from 2021 built. So seeing that sim definitely makes me quite happy. 60%. We're looking at in the 1s, 44%. So less convincing in the 1s. And then let's take a look at the 2s, 51%. So I think Blastoise, it'll go from no play to seeing, again, more anti-meta viability. I think people will be able to use it and have success. I don't think it'll burst onto the scene in the way Psywave Lapras does, but I think it'll be very, very playable. Next up, we have more Pokemon getting Rollout. Oh my goodness, we have a whole page of Pokemon getting Rollout. This update is genuinely massive. This update is pretty crazy, to be honest. We have Weezing. No, not that one. The other Weezing getting access to Rollout. Now, I do want to look more in the Great League for this one. Rollout, Sludge Bomb, and Shadow Ball. This is an unfortunate situation where I thought for a second that Kanto Weezing had Sludge, and I was very excited. But unfortunately, it doesn't. It is Sludge Bomb, Shadow Ball. So, Weezing, while it gets the fast move it desperately needed, now it's really in need of a move that's cheaper than 50 energy. That would be really, really clutch for it. But the more shields that are in play, it's just getting outpaced by things, and that's why its win rate continues to plummet. So this is a good step for Kanto Weezing. It needed a fast move, but now it needs a bait move if it's going to want to see serious play. Next up, we have Wailmer and Wailord. Now this, I will actually do a Matrix on. So we're going to look at Blastoise, we're going to take a look at Wailmer and Wailord, because it really feels like they are a lot of the same Pokemon. Time and time again. Oh, it's saying Surf Return. I think we're going to sim with either Blizzard or Hyper Beam. I think Blizzard makes the most sense. We'll do Great League. Okay. But these are basically like, they should all have a similar niche, so let's sim them together. And right off the bat, Blastoise, the huge winner in the 0s. Like 26 and 19 compared to both these two being underwater. We can take a look at the 1s. In the 1s, again, Blastoise just outperforming quite significantly. And let's take a look at the 2s. In the 2s, again, to me, it really just looks like Blastoise just outperforms Wailmer and Wailord. So of the 3, I would probably just go for Blastoise if you want an anti-meta Rollout water type. We have Glalie learning Rollout. This is not going to be particularly good. Glalie, right here, like Avalanche Shadow Ball. It's not a bad moveset per se, but Glalie, it's just going to struggle in a lot of situations. Like, it looks pretty good in 0s, but the more shields that are in play, like 17 and 29 suddenly. And then let's take a look at the 2s, 16 and 30. And it's another one of these where it now has the fast move, which is great, but it would really want a better bait move, just so that way Glalie can really thrive. Because in the 0s, everything looks great, but the more shields that are in play, this is a fast-paced meta. And if you're getting outpaced, you're losing. And that's where Glalie runs into struggles in the 1 and the 2 shield. Next up, we have Cradily learning the reworked Rock Tomb. And I'm a huge fan of Cradily. I love Cradily. Cradily got Rock Slide just for Rock Slide to get nerfed. Cradily did not deserve such treatment, and as a result, it has now been compensated with the addition of Rock Tomb. Rock Tomb, obviously more damage, less energy cost, guaranteed debuff. This is nice on Cradily. This is very nice on Cradily. Right here, picking up Charge Bug, Galarian Corsola. Oh my goodness, Corviknight, Cresselia, Toxapex. This thing looks cool. This thing looks very, very cool. 31 and 15? Oh my goodness. I know that's probably with a successful Rock Tomb bait, but man. What if we take away Grass Knot? Purely Rock Tomb in the ones. What is it doing? It's 26 and 20 just by clicking single move Rock Tomb. Alright, what are we looking at in the twos here? The twos, 27 and 19. So, again, let's take away Grass Knot and just say, just straight Rock Tomb. What is he doing? 25 and 21. I think Cradily is, again, in that, I think it's probably like a very usable top anti-meta Pokemon, where having that ability to kind of slow the opponent's roll, debuff them, outlast them over time is quite nice. Next up, we have Bombirdier. Bombirdier double buff. A lot of these Pokemon, they are really trying to make relevant. Bombirdier getting Rock Tomb, which we know is a great move, and Sucker Punch. This is nice. Bombirdier was released just to have its, unfortunately, just to have its fast move Wing Attack nerfed. It used to run Wing Attack, Fly, and Payback. Wing Attack got nerfed, and this thing was trash. Now it has Sucker Punch, so it can run Sucker Punch, Rock Tomb, and Fly. But the question is, in a meta where this is already a pretty crowded niche, there's already Galarian Moltres, there's already Mandibuzz, what we care about is how is it going to stack up to those existing Dark Flying Titans. And in the zeros, Moltres and Mandibuzz dramatically outperforming Bombirdier. Let's take a look at the ones. In the ones, pretty similar story. Bombirdier pretty underwater. The Moltres is underwater too. The Mandibuzz doing pretty nicely. But again, just more consistency and more wins from the other two. And finally, let's take a look at the twos. In the twos, this is the first time Bombirdier is outperforming. So Bombirdier, I don't think it's a bad Pokemon by any means, but I think it's a little bit of the Wailmer Wailord syndrome, where it's not bad, but there's things in its niche that do what it does better. And as a result, unless you just don't have Mandibuzz and Moltres, or you have a very specific team where you want the coverage that Bombirdier offers, I mean, even then, Moltres has the same coverage. I think you're probably going to default more to Moltres and Mandibuzz. Next up, we have new Pokemon learning Sludge. The first of which is going to be Swampert. Swampert, I'll admit, it's been long enough that I think I'm excited to have Swampert back, and I don't know how to feel about that. It had Sludge Wave, now it gets access to Sludge. Sludge Wave was outrageous. 9 to the first, never. Never happening, ever. But now, straight 5 to Sludge. A lot more playable. Here you are picking up Feraligatr, but dropping Wigglytuff, and that is in the zeros. Let's take a look at the ones on Swampert. It does look like the pacing, although it does improve it, the pacing here not affecting a lot of matchups. You are picking up Azumarill 2s. I do also want to throw the Shadow Swampert in here, because obviously Sludge, you don't get same type attack bonus, but I do want to take a look at Shadow Swampert, because I believe that one, so Shadow Swampert, able to pick up Azumarill, but there are some matchups that it's dropping in the zeros just because it's a lot glassier. But with Shadow Swampert, more often than not, you're not playing zeros. You're playing for shielded. Shadow Swampert is picking up Azumarill, Annihilate, Quag, and Sableye, dropping Diggersby and Wigglytuff. And let's take a look at the twos. And in the twos, again, an improvement for Swampert. So overall, Sludge should help bring Swampert back as a slightly more playable Pokemon. Mudshot rework still means it's straight 5 to move, so it doesn't really have that 5-4 outpacing anymore, but Sludge should help it be stronger into the Azumarill Shadow Drapion core, which was obviously the best core this current season. So if that core continues, I could see Swampert returning and having a bit of viability. Again, I don't think this is a Pokemon that's breaching into the top meta, but I think it'll have solid anti-meta play, specifically if that core continues. Next up, we have Swalot. Swalot also getting access to Sludge. Swalot, they have buffed time and time again. They gave it Mud Shot, they've given it a lot of stuff, but now it gets access to Sludge. Sludge is its cheapest move now. It didn't have a bait move other than Acid Spray, and Acid Spray does not count. So, previously, it was Ice Beam Sludge Bomb, so it only had nukes, and like 7 to a move just feels terrible. But 5 to a move feels a lot better than 7. So let's take a look. What is Swalot dealing with? Swalot, an improvement in zeros, but still underwater. Let's take a look at ones. Swalot also a Halloween Cup Demon. Big improvement in the ones, that better pacing helping it out a lot. It's still not doing great, but it's doing a lot better than it was doing. And in the twos, again, so Swalot's improved. I think this is one to keep an eye on for future Halloween Cups. It is another Pokemon that could potentially target the As You Shadow Drapion core, but at the same time, I think neutrally, it's still struggling enough to where I think it's not going to see a lot of play. And then we have Dragalge getting Sludge Bomb. When I first saw this, I thought Dragalge was getting Sludge, and I was very excited. But unfortunately, Dragalge is not getting Sludge. Dragalge is getting Sludge Bomb. Sludge Bomb, I mean, it's going to help it. It's not a bad thing it gets access to Sludge Bomb. Like, there are a couple matchups that it can pick up just because it has Sludge Bomb, because Gunk Shot is just so prohibitively expensive. Like, it is just... What is the count on Gunk Shot? 9 to the first. Yeah, 27 turns is atrocious. So it is going to be helped out by the fact that it is no longer the slowest Pokemon in the universe to get to its nuke move. So that's a definite plus. But in the grand scheme of things, I think that overall, it's still a Pokemon that's not going to see immense play. Again, more of just a Pokemon to keep an eye out for Halloween Cup. The next Pokemon, however, I think could be a really interesting sleeper, and that is Roserade. Roserade currently running Poison Jab, but it now gets access to Poison Sting. Well, it runs Poison Jab, Bullet Seed, Magical Leaf. How many fast moves does this thing have? Apparently not enough, as now it gets access to Poison Sting. Poison Sting is very fast. That's straight 4 to Weather Ball Fire, and that's Leaf Storm with 7 to the first. And I'm even down to sim it against Bullet Seed. So it is going to be faster overall across the board, which is nice, and giving a Pokemon as frail as Roserade, like this is 1500 stat product. It is extremely, extremely frail, but giving a frail Pokemon better pacing, oh my goodness, it is still an average of a negative, which means that it's winning a lot more, but when it loses, it loses. But it's picking up a lot of extra wins due to this incredibly fast pacing. It's a Poison Sting mod that can bait and then land a Leaf Storm into Grumpig and pick up the ones. So, oh, sorry, the zeros, I stand corrected. So it's not even baiting. It's just making a Leaf Storm and Grumpig is no longer there. Let's take a look at the ones. In the ones, oh my goodness. If you can successfully bait and then land a nuke, Roserade's win rate is absurd. Granted, this is very bait dependent. Let's take away its ability to bait and watch that win rate come tumbling down to 12 and 34. So Roserade's going to be very high risk, high reward. If you get them to shield a Weather Ball, you're suddenly in a dominating position. If they no-shield your Weather Ball, you are crying and you now have the world's most useless plant. So it is going to be very interesting with Roserade. Roserade as well could be a Pokemon where if you're able to get a slight energy advantage on it, it could put in a tremendous amount of work. Like soft losing a lead matchup to try and get a Poison Sting down with Roserade would probably honestly feed families. Like that would go crazy. And in the twos, 22 and 24, and that's with baiting on. With baiting off, it just gets destroyed. So this is very much a Pokemon where you are gonna have to rely on baits. Like you're gonna be very feast or famine. You either need to get an energy advantage or a shield advantage so that way you don't have to bait, or in evens, you're gonna have to get a shield call right. That means landing a Leaf Storm through the opponent having a shield and them thinking you're baiting or successfully baiting. So Roserade, very feast or famine, but the upside this Pokemon has is insane. We're almost through. Next up, we have Florges with Trailblaze. I could look at it for Great and Ultra. It'll be better for Great and Ultra, but realistically, I think its main play is going to be Masters, because that's where we see this Pokemon the most. Florges previously had Petal Blizzard. Now, Petal Blizzard, it's a grass move, which is nice, but it's very expensive, and Trailblaze is a lot cheaper. So we'll take a look at the Master League meta across the board. And we'll take a look at it with its current moveset, Disarming Voice Moonblast, and with sacrificing Moonblast for the coverage of Trailblaze. Now, Trailblaze, able to pick up some wins, but there are some losses due to the fact that you don't have the closing power with Moonblast. So it looks like there is a little bit of... There is a little bit of feast or famine here, some give and take, so to speak. Not necessarily feast and famine. I've been recording this for like an hour, so I apologize there. I misspoke. But yeah, there is a bit of give and take here. Like, losing the closing power of Moonblast is going to hurt in some matchups. Like, you're now losing to Kyurem Black and White, but you are picking up some matchups like Rhyperior. So I think it's probably a slight, like... Trailblaze specifically in Premier I think could be nice, or in the 2s could be interesting. But I think if you're running Florges and Open Masters, you probably just want the closing power of Moonblast, because being a fairy type that loses to Kyurem Black and White, not a fun time. Being a fairy type that loses to Dialga Origin, not a particularly fun time. So I think it's interesting. It's probably more of a Master League Premier moveset. Whereas in Premier, there's more Ursaluna, Rhyperior, Pokemon like that. But in Open Masters, I think you're probably sticking with Moonblast. All right, next up we have some Pokemon learning Sucker Punch. The first of which is Mightyena. Mightyena, pretty cool Pokemon. Let's take a look here. Not the greatest stats, 1700, but previously it was stuck with the Fangs and Bite, and now it gets Sucker Punch. So Sucker Punch, I mean, it's definitely better than what it had. So let's take a look at its matchup. 16 and 29, pretty rough in the zeros. To be expected, though. It's a pretty glassy Mon, and with Sucker Punch and Crunch, you're probably not getting through some of these more bulky Pokemon. Whereas I'm expecting it to do a lot better since it's a Sucker Punch usually with Poison Fang when shields are up. 19 and 27 in the 1s. I was expecting a little better than that. The 2s, I'm expecting it'll have more wins than losses. The 2s, yeah, 28 and 18, a huge win rate. So in the 2s, it can kind of just Poison Fang, degen through a lot of things. I think it's pretty similar vibes to something like a Low Kicks. Whereas if we put Low Kicks here and put it in the zeros, very, very similar win rate. Obviously, they're going to have different matchups that they win or lose, but very, very similar win rates across the board. Whereas if you put Low Kicks in the 2s, Low Kicks has its highest win rate. So when you think of Mightyena, obviously it doesn't have the same typing, but I think Low Kicks is a pretty comparable Pokemon for that, where some people will be able to make it work. It's more of an anti-meta role, but I do think this season, being a Pokemon that resists Psywave is quite useful. And then the final change to take a look at here, Bellibolt gets its coverage move, and its coverage move is, of all things, Sucker Punch. So, first of all, on Bellibolt, it's always going to run Parabolic Charge. It is never going to not run Parabolic Charge. Parabolic Charge is part of what makes Bellibolt great. 2/3 chance to buff your defense one stage, yes please. Let's take a look here in the zeros. It is running about even. So obviously some new wins, like you're picking up Corsola, but some losses as well. We can now move it to the 1s. In the 1s, Sucker Punch is performing worse, just because Sucker Punch you don't get the same type of attack bonus on. Let's take a look at the 2s. In the 2s, you're performing quite a bit worse. I do want to look at Ultra League as well, so I can quickly adjust these to Ultra. And I'll adjust this to Ultra Meta as well. Rank 1s. And let's take a look at our good friend Bellibolt. Bellibolt doing better in the zeros. Okay. And now we can take a look at the 1s. In the 1s, ooh, Ultra League Sucker Punch looking very nice so far. You are picking up, like, you are now beating Giratina. You are dropping Annihilate, Cobalion, Pangoro, and Typhlosion. But Sucker Punch, Bellibolt, and Ultra looking kind of nice. And in the 2s, Sucker Punch is going to perform quite a bit worse. So maybe Thundershock's still the way to go overall. But I think on particular teams, Sucker Punch could have viability. I have 2 more final Pokemon that I want to cover. And these are Pokemon that are both very highly meta relevant. The first of which is going to be Claydol. Claydol, last season, Rock Tomb was not doing much for it, so much so that it only really saw play in limited metas. But with the big Rock Tomb rework, Claydol now genuinely looks very, very scary. So for reference, we're going to put Claydol up against Shadow Marowak and Gastrodon, so we can compare in the niche of Mud Slapper we can kind of see who is going to emerge on top. So in the zeros, Gastrodon is going to be king. Gastrodon, monstrously bulky, able to just out-bulk a lot of things that the Shadow Marowak and Claydol are struggling a bit more into. But Claydol can do things like beat Talonflame in the zeros, same with Marowak, due to the fact that it does have Rock Tomb. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at the ones. The ones, Gastrodon still very, very strong. Second place is now Claydol, and Claydol actually has the better overall average. So Claydol is more consistent than Gastrodon, whereas Gastrodon is very much in this one shield, very reliant on baiting with a Body Slam and landing with an Earth Power. Like, if we turn off baiting here, Gastrodon suddenly a lot worse. Just because Gastrodon and Claydol drops a little bit as well. But Gastrodon is very reliant on baiting, whereas Claydol is definitely less so, because as you see here, Rock Tomb and Scorching Sands are both going to be the same counts. And now let's take a look at the 2 shield, and in the 2 shield, we have Shadow Marowak leading the pack with Claydol and Gastrodon. So I think Claydol should have a lot of play in this meta, just purely based on the fact that it can kind of degen its way through things in a way that, oh, and actually a really fun matchup that it picks up right here is actually Azumarill. You are winning the 2s, pretty similar to what Shadow Marowak can do. So Claydol, very similar vibes to Shadow Marowak all in all, but if we take a look across the zeros here, Claydol is going to be pretty similar in performance. So I think overall, it is going to end up being a very similar role to Shadow Marowak, and as a result, should have a lot of play. So I think Claydol definitely benefiting from the Rock Tomb buff, and should end up, for those who somehow don't have Shadow Marowak, instead of using the regular, Claydol should be a pretty viable alternative. Personally, I think I'd still probably slightly prefer the Marowak just because of the better pacing, but if you don't have Marowak, Claydol should also perform pretty comparably. And then the other one that I do want to take a look at is going to be Dusclops. So as we take a look here, Claydol now at number 15. Let's take a look at Dusclops at number 8. So Dusclops, of course, a big beneficiary of the Hex buff. And let's take a look at our good friend Dusclops. So Dusclops, we will start off versus the meta. In the zero shield, we're looking at 52%. Obviously going to struggle quite a bit against Drapion. One nice matchup for it is it actually, I believe, wins all evens against Diggersby, just due to the fact that obviously it's basically a battle of double resisted damage, but in the long run, your Ice Punches hitting for super effective mean that you're a Ghost type that actually beats Diggersby. In the ones, looking a little bit worse, so it is negative in the ones. In the 2s here, we're looking at 56%. Obviously, you have the ability to run Poltergeist if you want to. That gives you higher upside in terms of bait and nuke, but you are dramatically reduced in terms of your consistency. So I do think that Dusclops is probably going to be another one of those where it should have some pretty nice anti-meta play. When push comes to shove, as we kind of segue into the conclusion of this video, most of the Pokemon that are good this season are still going to be good next season. And I think that's nice. We're going to have a lot more anti-meta options, core breakers to really make things feel fresh. But a lot of the meta that you've grown to know should remain somewhat similar. Like Pokemon like Azumarill, Shadow Drapion, especially the Drapion, should still have a lot of viability, but now there's a lot of new things and strong anti-meta roles that can help fight back. So I think this is kind of the best case scenario out of a move update halfway through a season, whereas they have made it clear every September they like to take a hatchet to the meta, basically get rid of most of what was good and build a new meta. And they've done so. We have some very flexible options with the Azumarill, Shadow Drapion, and building out a meta from there. And now to keep things fresh, a lot of what's good is still going to be good, but we have a lot more options. I think Lapras can probably break through into a meta role. And I think that potentially some of these fringe meta, top anti-meta, depending on how the meta shakes out, any of those could potentially end up in meta contender roles as well. It'll just depend how the meta develops from here. But I'm very excited for this update. Let me know down in the comments, what's the change that you're the most excited about? What are you looking to try on day number 1? Because my goodness, there was a lot to cover. So if you're still here watching through, I mean, we're probably over 90 minutes at this point. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you did end up finding this video helpful, please do leave a like on it, as it helps the video get recommended to others. And a special thank you to the channel members. The support you guys provide is genuinely so appreciated. So thank you guys oh so very much. And until next time, I've been Home Slice Henry.